Imagine waking up one morning and finding out that a right you've always had, something as fundamental as voting, suddenly needs, well, new proof,
Yeah.
an unexpected test. We're going to dive into exactly that kind of situation today. It's unfolding right now in Bihar, India, and it's posing a huge challenge to millions of citizens there. It's a really big deal. Okay, so let's try to unpack this. We've been digging into some pretty complex information about what's happening with voter registration over there. Our goal today is really to cut through the noise, look at it from different angles, and show you what this actually means, on the ground, legally, and what it might mean for democracy itself.
Yeah, what's really striking, I think, is how something that seems like just an administrative change, an order, can suddenly spark such intense debate. And it raises these really basic questions about who's a citizen, who gets a say. I mean, this isn't just paperwork we're talking about. It's fundamentally about participation, about people having a voice in their own future.
Exactly. So let's get into the details. What is this new rule? What's actually happening? Well, on June 24th, 2025, the Election Commission of India, the ECI, they issued what they're calling a special intensive revision of electoral rolls, specifically in Bihar. And this isn't some minor tweak. This order says that nearly 60% of Bihar's voters, that's about 4.74 crore people, so what, 47 million people?
So right, a massive number.
All those who enrolled after 2003 now have to actively prove they are Indian citizens.
Right. And the specifics of how they prove it, well, that's where it gets really tricky for a lot of people.
Yeah, tell us about that.
So if you were born before July 1st, 1987, the rule says you need proof of your own place and date of birth. Okay, maybe straightforward for some, but maybe not for everyone, especially in rural areas. But here's the real kicker, like you said. If you're younger than that, born after that date, you don't just need your own proof. You need proof of your parents' citizenship.
Wow. Just imagine that. You could have voted before, lived your whole life there, but now your vote depends on finding maybe an old birth certificate for your mom or dad.
Exactly. Documents they might not have or might be lost or were never even issued consistently back then. It's a huge sudden burden on millions.
And the timing, you mentioned timing earlier, that seems pretty significant too, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The timing is critical here. This order comes just a few months before the Bihar Assembly elections, which have to happen before November 2025. So while the ECI says, this is about electoral integrity, we're cleaning up the rolls, addressing concerns about ineligible voters, well, the opposition sees it differently.
I bet they do.
Yeah, you've got 11 parties from the NDA bloc, which is a major opposition alliance, alleging that this could actually be a move to manipulate voter turnout, to, suppress votes among certain groups right before a major election.
And the practicalities. How are people supposed to do this? The deadline sounds tight.
It's incredibly tight. July 25th, 2025, that's the deadline for submitting documents.
Wow, that's not much time at all for potentially millions of people.
Not at all. And they've mobilized almost 78,000 booth-level officers, the BLOs, to go house to house. Now, there are provisions, supposedly, for local verification by these BLOs if someone genuinely lacks the documents. But, that just adds another layer of uncertainty. It becomes discretionary, potentially.
Right. And relying on local verification, that could be inconsistent, couldn't it?
Yeah.
Especially in a place like Bihar where, let's be honest, keeping meticulous records hasn't always been the top priority for generations.
Yeah.
Many people just don't have birth certificates.
Precisely. It's often not about evasion. It's just the reality of life and historical record-keeping practices in many parts of the state.
Now, you mentioned earlier, this isn't completely out of the blue. There's some history here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Though maybe not quite like this.
That's right. It's not entirely unprecedented to review rolls for citizenship issues. Back in 1994, for instance, there was a situation where about 167,000 names were deleted from voter lists in parts of Greater Bombay and Delhi. The reason given then was also suspicion of non-citizenship. But it was much more targeted, affecting specific pockets, not nearly half a state's electorate.
Okay, so that 1994 incident, did anything come out of that legally?
Yes, absolutely. That's a crucial point. It led directly to a really important Supreme Court judgment in 1995. It's known as the Lal Babu Hussain judgment. And the court was very, very clear. It said any deletions like that, they have to be based on actual material evidence for each individual. You can't just do mass deletions based on suspicion.
So due process.
Exactly, due process. Individuals have to be given a fair hearing, a chance to respond. And significantly, the court said that if someone is already on the electoral roll, that implies some form of verification already happened when they first registered. You can't just ignore that.
So the court basically put safeguards in place against arbitrary removals.
Precisely. It emphasized individual rights and the need for concrete proof before taking away someone's right to vote.
Okay, so fast forward to 2025 in Bihar. The ECI says it's cleaning up the list. But it sounds like instead of targeting specific cases with evidence, like the Supreme Court suggested, they're kind of flipping the burden.
That's how critics are framing it, yes. Instead of the ECI needing evidence to remove someone, it feels like millions of voters now need to proactively provide evidence to stay on the list.
Right. It's like they're playing detective, but asking everyone for their papers, not just the suspects. And the scale. Comparing it to 1994, this is just enormous. Millions across the whole state.
It's a fundamentally different scale and approach, yes. Which brings us to the legal questions surrounding this specific order.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Legally speaking, does the ECI actually have the power to demand this kind of mass citizenship proof from existing voters?
Well, that's the heart of the debate. If you look at the main laws governing elections, the Representation of the People Act, 1950, and the Registration of Electors Rules, 1960, they generally require a declaration of citizenship when you register. The verification part has traditionally been the job of the authorities, the electoral registration officer. It wasn't typically about demanding proof from the voter after they're already on the list, especially not on this scale.
So the discussion was, you declare you're a citizen, they do their checks, and unless specific evidence pops up later against you, you're good.
Largely, yes. The system operated more on that basis.
And what about the basic citizenship law itself?
That makes it even more complex. The Citizenship Act of 1955, specifically Section 3, is pretty clear that for most people born in India, birth in India itself grants citizenship. It doesn't usually require additional proof beyond establishing the fact of birth.
So critics are essentially saying this ECI order is asking people to prove something the Citizenship Act says they don't need to prove in this way.
Yeah.
And that it shifts the burden onto the voter.
Exactly. They argue it potentially violates constitutional rights by imposing this new, arguably extra statutory requirement. It's like, you own your house, you have the deed, and suddenly someone demands you prove you own it without any specific challenge to your title.
So the ECI's action, this large-scale audit, it doesn't seem to have clear, explicit backing in the existing election laws for this specific method.
That's the core legal challenge being raised.
Ah.
Past practice involved routine annual revisions, which were seen as sufficient. This special intensive revision demanding citizenship proof from millions outside that normal cycle and right before an election. While it raises serious questions about whether the ECI is overstepping its mandate.
Okay, so putting the legal stuff aside for a moment, let's think about the real people involved. What's the human impact of this in Bihar?
Oh, the potential impact is severe. You have to remember the context of Bihar. It's a state with significant challenges, high rates of poverty, lower literacy levels compared to some other states,
Right.
which means, practically speaking, a huge number of residents simply don't have things like formal birth certificates or neatly organized official documents going way back.
They might have lived there their whole lives, voted many times.
Absolutely. Voted in multiple elections, paid taxes perhaps, accessed government schemes. But now this specific type of proof is demanded, and for many it's just not there. It might have been lost in floods, which are common, or just never existed formally.
So who gets hit hardest by this?
Well, data and experience suggest it disproportionately affects marginalized communities. Groups like the extremely backward classes, EBCs, scheduled castes, SCs, and also Muslim communities often face greater hurdles in accessing or possessing these kinds of formal documents.
And the opposition parties, they're putting a number on this potential disenfranchisement.
They are. Their estimates are stark. They're suggesting over 2 crore voters, that's more than 20 million people, could potentially be pushed off the rolls because they can't navigate this process or produce the required documents in time.
20 million people. That could massively impact the election outcome, couldn't it? Lower turnout, skewed representation.
Absolutely. It could fundamentally alter the shape of the electorate and who gets represented.
And it feels like, sadly, it's often the most vulnerable who get caught in these kinds of bureaucratic nets, doesn't it? The poor, the less educated, the very people whose vote might be their most powerful tool.
It's a deeply concerning aspect, yes. Access to the ballot box suddenly hinges on paperwork that might be completely out of reach due to circumstances, not due to any question about their actual right to be there.
Okay, let's broaden the view a bit. If this approach works, or is seen to work, in Bihar, what are the bigger implications? Could this spread?
That's a major concern. If this method is implemented successfully in Bihar, despite the challenges and controversies, it could absolutely set a precedent. You could potentially see similar exercises rolled out nationally.
Wow. Imagine having to prove your citizenship before every election everywhere in India.
It would fundamentally change the relationship between the citizen and the state regarding voting rights. It risks creating a system where everyone is treated as a potential non-citizen until they prove otherwise, shifting from a presumption of inclusion to a presumption of, well, suspicion.
That sounds like it could really erode trust and democratic progress, doesn't it? Decades of work making voting more accessible, potentially reversed.
It definitely risks undermining that progress, and it could normalize a kind of systemic distrust, particularly towards poorer or marginalized communities who often struggle most with documentation.
And it seems to cleverly sidestep the spirit, if not the letter, of that Lal Babu Hussein judgment we talked about.
In a way, yes, that judgment focused on needing specific evidence before deletion. This approach puts the onus on the voter to provide evidence to avoid deletion, which feels like a very different philosophy. It flips the innocent until proven guilty idea on its head for voting rights.
Guilty until proven innocent.
Oui.
Definitely not how democracy should work.
And the potential chilling effect nationally is significant. If people fear being struck off the list because they lack papers, they might just disengage entirely. Even if the policy isn't formally adopted everywhere, the fear could spread.
So it's a kind of disenfranchisement, even without a direct order everywhere.
Potentially, yes, a de facto disenfranchisement. And again, doing this outside the normal revision cycle right before an election, it raises unavoidable questions about the constitutional basis and the political intent behind it.
Okay, so for people listening, especially if they or someone they know is in Bihar and enrolled after 2003, what should they be doing right now? The deadline is looming.
Action is definitely needed, and quickly. First step, check your voter status immediately. Then, gather whatever documents you can possibly find. Birth certificates are ideal, obviously, but also things like old-school leaving certificates, maybe land records, ration cards, Aadhaar card, any government ID that might help establish identity, age, and residence. Anything helps. Then, they need to get the required enumeration form, fill it out, and submit it to their local booth-level officer, the BLO, before that July 25th deadline.
And what if they just don't have those documents?
The ECI says local verification by the BLO is possible, but individuals should actively engage with the BLO, explain their situation, perhaps provide statements from local elders or officials if possible. There's also an appeals process during the claims and objections period later, but that's another hurdle.
So the message is, don't wait. That July 25th deadline is critical. Engage with the process now, even if it's difficult.
Absolutely. Don't risk being left out.
This whole situation, it really throws into sharp relief that tension, doesn't it? The tension between wanting clean, accurate voter rolls, electoral integrity, and ensuring everyone who has the right to vote can actually exercise it, democratic access.
It's a very delicate balance, and perhaps a system that puts such a heavy documentation burden on potentially millions of vulnerable citizens right before an election. Maybe that balance is off.
It forces us all to think about voter rights, about the role of institutions like the ECI, and how we protect democracy for everyone, not just those who find paperwork easy.
It's a constant vigilance required, really.
So, wrapping this up, we've dug into a situation in Bihar that's much more than just red tape. It's got history, complex legal questions, and huge human consequences for potentially millions. It's a live test, really, of how India balances electoral rules with the fundamental right to participate.
And it leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? What is the core responsibility of our democratic institutions? Is it primarily to ensure access to rights, or is it sometimes to impose new burdens, even if that disproportionately affects the most vulnerable? How do we genuinely square that circle? How do we pursue electoral integrity without sacrificing inclusion, especially in a democracy as vast and diverse as India's?
That is indeed a powerful question, something for all of us to think about as we watch this situation develop. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.